Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Leopard 2K. Now, before I begin to make the tank review itself, I want to clarify certain things. All the videos that I did in the last week about the high tier tanks were just some first impressions and also not really tank reviews, as certain people pointed out in the comment section. Thank you, Napalm, for that tank review. Well, sorry, but this was not a tank review. What you're about to see is a proper tank review of mine, and this is important to note here because I have not done a proper tank review in quite some time, and I think it's very important to clarify this. I'm not just rambling about the tanks, its pros and cons, and what I feel about it. I'm bringing statistics to the table. I'm bringing some data sheets to the table and some hard facts from the game itself. But I also want to interpret them for you, what this means in the gameplay and on the battlefields and so forth. What opponent to shoot where and so forth, which ammunition you should use, the stock grind, and many more things. So I think this is now what clarifies the terminology tank review. Let's talk about the tank, shall we? So first of all, the Leopard 2K is not a Leopard 2 by itself. It's a prototype based on a Leopard 1, basically, heavily modified of course, with a bigger gun. And what a gun it is! The 120mm Rheinmetall L44 is fantastic and also is responsible for me liking the tank. But to make it all in a nutshell, the gun is good, especially against Soviet tanks in particular, and I want to fight Soviet tanks with this tank all day long. I love to shoot at T-64As, T-64Bs, and any other sort of Soviet tank. But the problem is, of course, there are not the most played tanks out there at the moment, and the most played tank out there, at least what it feels like, is the M1 Abrams, which is actually not that easy to fight because it counters you in many of your positive aspects. So yeah, that is now the tank in a nutshell. It's fast, it's maneuverable, it has great firepower, it has a good stock grind, it's fun to play, and I think it has potential in the future. However, let's begin with the armor, and this is where now the actual tank review begins. So we have here the outer hull consisting of high hardened rolled armor, and the lower glacis is a bit thicker than the upper one in raw thickness, but it doesn't have a convincing angle. It's just 55 degrees, which would be nice if the armor would be thicker and it would be at lower battle rating. But at this tier against HeatFS, APFSDS, and to a certain degree even still Hash, this is around about a third of the profile from the front that gets easily penetrated. The upper hull, on the other hand, also consists of high hardened rolled armor, just 50mm thick, but at an angle of 75 degrees, and I have ricocheted some APFSDS rounds from here and some APDS rounds from stock challenges and whatnot. But you should not rely on it. I will come to this in a moment. This part here is even more heavily angled but a smaller target, and all those stuff makes shells to ricochet into the, well, this kind of shot trap, to which I will come in a moment, on the gun mantle. It's not that difficult to hit actually. And the turret also is very heavily angled. We have a lot of high hardened rolled armor that actually makes it difficult for the shots that hit you to dig into the armor. So there you have actually a higher chance of ricocheting stuff. That is basically what I found out in the gameplays. And then also the sight is, well, there it's flat. It's a not that small target. We just have 29, 19 and 16 millimeters. And the turret in particular is a big target. And yeah, the rear is just 12 millimeters. And the roof of this big tank is also 20 millimeters thick. So a lot of cannons can go through. A lot of rockets will still penetrate and one-shot you. And yeah. Then there is this sight, and the sight is pretty troll here with the 12 millimeters. I will come to this in a moment. And now let's have a look at the X-ray, and then we can see that we have 4 crew members, of which 3 are tightly packed together in the turret with some red rack ammunition. We have some fuel tank, and what is that? Spaced armor. spaced armor on many parts of the tank. And this is where the trolliness of the armor comes really into it. Now let me talk you through. I got hit a lot in the turret and the shrapnels got absorbed by the spaced armor, and just the gun and or the gun breech got damaged, but no real damage to the crew, so I could retreat, repair and re-engage the enemy. And the same goes for some side shots, especially from SPAA. They just want to shoot the side of your turret. But as we can see, we have here a kinetic energy ammunition resistance of 60 millimeters. That counters a lot of the enemy SPAA, especially when you're slightly angled. The same goes for the hull, which is extremely troll, because we just not have spaced armor, but also fuel tanks behind them on the side. And this is where most people shoot on the upper bar or upper part of the hull, because they're so used to it fighting German tanks. When fighting a Panther, when fighting a Tiger, Tiger II, Jagdtiger, any sort of German tank, you always shoot just under the turret, and mostly there is ammunition. And even when fighting against a Leopard, you always do a lot of damage. And this is where it comes really funny into the gameplay, because you are, well, pretty immune against HESH shell from the sides, the side skirts, the spaced armor, and also the fuel tanks absorbing a lot of shrapnels. And also sometimes APFSDS shells just disappear into the void of War Thunder. Don't ask me why, I just work here. So this is pretty troll. Do I recommend angling the tank? No, I recommend to not get hit in the first place. And so that is the key to success in this tank. Now let's talk about the ammunition for a moment. So it gets protected, at least this ammo rack here from the front, by a fuel tank. But when a shot penetrates the fuel tank, mostly just APFSDS, as heat FS gets mostly absorbed in the fuel tank, then well, this ammo rack blows off. But the first ammo rack that gets used is this one. But you cannot take out those shells that look like the ammo rack on the STA-1 or STA-2 at lower battle ratings in the Japanese tech tree. No, this ready rack gets constantly refilled to sustain your relatively high rate of fire. And if those 11 shots are gone, then you have an increased reload rate. Or increased reload time rather, and reduced reload rate. And so then those shells get used, and if you are just, you know, moving to another position, repositioning yourself, which is also a fundamental part of the playstyle of this tank, then they get pumped in here and your rate of fire increases again to the maximum. This is not an autoloader, so your crew skills depend, unlike for example on the T-64B. And yeah, that's about it with the armor and the X-ray. Let's move on to talk about some other statistics. So now let's talk about the speed and maneuverability of the tank, basically the mobility. And we have a very strong engine, 1500 horsepower, and as you can see, engine of this strength is shared with the KPZ-70, which is also, for all intents and purposes, as strong as the M1 Abrams engine. And we have here a very tightly packed weight distribution, with the Leopard having exactly 50.0 tons. That gives it a specific horsepower to ton ratio of 30.0, which is in this comparison simply the best. Quickly followed by the KPZ-70 and MBT-70 as well, and also the M1 Abrams, which is probably the hardest counter of this tank due to this mobility. So the top speed is also very impressive with 70 kilometers an hour. That this tank also can go backwards, and this is just simply great, also because you're always capable of reaching this top speed on flat ground even, or on hard terrain in particular. But there are some issues with it, and I have to mention them, and I have mentioned them on some other tanks as well, and these are the gear shifting bugs. First of all, if for example you want to accelerate down a hill, you know, which should be possible because then the weight of the tank gets kind of neglected by the force facing downwards, the driver is incapable of keeping the higher gear, shifts back to the lower gear, and in this time you just don't accelerate. And he is doing this like this. fifth gear, sixth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear, and so forth. And this just literally kills the acceleration. And then when you are back on flat terrain, the tank actually accelerates again. And manual shifting even doesn't help here. And this is so annoying, especially on some of the larger maps where you really need to use the speed. Again, which on flat terrain you mostly can use. And then also at lower speeds, the tank shows a surprising amount of sluggishness. So the response from the engine up until the point it revs up or it delivers the full power. Also a gear shifting bug between third and fourth gear when you just want to turn, where one of the tracks is just simply not able to keep its position on the ground, but gets pulled with the rest of the tank or the other track. And also the neutral steering is way too slow for my personal taste and doesn't feel really that natural for a tank of that high horsepower to ton ratio. But this is just me, I guess. Of course, it's still able to be worked around, but it's just simply annoying. And this is also to a certain degree true with the KPZ-70. The problem here is the M1 Abrams, which just simply has a higher rate of fire and can easily penetrate you, whereas you have to aim for specific weak spots, and you have also lack of armor, and he can counter you with the speed, so you're not really able to get away from him, because 7% difference in horsepower to ton ratio at that battle rating at those maps just doesn't make a big difference. But you have a significant advantage compared to the Challenger 1, and in particular the T-64B, which sadly I don't face too much on the battlefields. And this brings us now to the firepower. And as we can see, the Leopard 2K is equipped with the 120mm Rheinmetall L44. It carries 41 shells with it and has a ace crew reload of 6.7 seconds. With an expert crew, you will match the 7.1 auto-loading reload of the T-64B, and you have a significant advantage over the KPZ-70/MBT-70. However, we can see that you have the same reload as the Challenger 1 with its 120mm L11A5 gun, and the M1 Abrams with the smallest gun in this comparison has what feels like naturally the fastest reload with an ace crew of 5.0 seconds. And this is really where again the M1 Abrams just beats the Leopard 2K, and rightfully so has a higher battle rating. The turret rotation speed is fantastic, in fact fanatic, with 40 degrees per second, same as the M1 Abrams, beating even the KPZ-70's 36 degrees per second. And as we can see, both the Challenger 1 and the T-64B are left in the dust with this. And then we come to the gun depression, and 9 degrees is in some situation just 1 degree less than you need. In most situations 9 degrees is fine, and you beat the T-64B by 3 degrees, which is nice, and also your gun elevation is nice of 20 degrees, which also helps you to shoot down aircraft with your main gun, and if you miss them with your main gun you still have a 20mm turret mounted cannon that helps you to defend yourself against aircraft or scare them away. Your elevation speed is another interesting story because it's 20 degrees per second, and while the KPZ-70 and the M1 Abrams beat you in that, it's still fast enough, and it just beats the Challenger 1s and T-64B's abysmal 5 and 2.5 degrees per second respectively by quite some bit. So the tank has no real downside when it comes to mobility, even to a bit trollish armor and the firepower. But the quintessence is not at this battle rating the gun, but the ammunition. And especially the stock run on the Challenger is quite hefty to come to AP-FSDS rounds, and the Leopard 2K also doesn't have AP-FSDS rounds, much like the KPZ-70 when it comes stock. The M1 Abrams and the T-64B come with AP-FSDS rounds, but I also need them. Now let's have a quick look at the ammunition. And for the Rheinmetall L44, we basically just have two shell types, and the first stock shell is the DM12 Heat FS round. And it's really, really good. In fact, I think it's one of the best stock shells in the game, but I have to put it into perspective. First of all, we have 650 millimeters of penetration, making it stronger by 50 millimeters compared to the SS11 ATGM, and also with 1140 meters per second, around about 4 times faster than the ATGM on the T64B, which has the same amount of penetration. And the funny thing about this shell is, as I will show you just in a moment, is against which tanks you can use it. I just love to one-shotting T64As and T64Bs at any distance through the upper glacis or the lower glacis, and also damaging them through the turret at such ease and blowing them up due to the fact where their ammo racks is, that I love to fight against Soviet tanks. And as well, you have superior position capabilities due to your mobility, as you just saw previously. And the damage output is also there. Now, there is also a problem associated with Heat FS, and that is that you cannot really shoot through engines and kill the crew with it as well. This is where then the second shell, the DM13 AP-FSDS, comes into play. And to be honest, with the speed that the tanks have, with the great shooting distances, with the magnification of the scope, and when you're used to AP-FSDS or APDS, you might get the feel that the muzzle velocity is low and lazy and so forth, but in fact it isn't. 1140 meters per second is still very much usable. The another downside of the Heat FS round is that, you know, you cannot shoot really through fences, bushes, trees, wooden obstacles and so forth. However, you have a 20mm cannon that helps you a lot with removing the cover from an enemy tank and so forth, and then have a clear line of sight for shooting and also line of fire. And yeah, the shell is great, but you have your issues when shooting at the composite armor of the Challenger 1 and also the, well, M1 Abrams. And against those tanks, we have in fact a tier 1 upgrade, so the stock grind is very, very much doable, to the DM13. And a lot of people shoot nothing but the DM13 once they get it, but I think you always should keep your mind also with having some Heat FS rounds with you. But we have 417 millimeters of penetration, which is good. We have some good test shooting results against some composite armor as well, and also against the non-armored parts of tanks. Great muzzle velocity of 1615 meters per second. It's great, it's doable, and yeah, as a tier 1 upgrade, it's really, really fine. Hitting targets at longer ranges, targets that move, targets that run through bushes, trees and so forth. With this shell type, it's doable. Also great post-penetration damage effect due to the fact that it is AP-FSDS and not APDS. Here a big shout out to the Challenger 1 stock shell. And it is okay-ish with the price of 410 silver lines per shot. I think that is nothing compared to the 1600 silver lines, for example, on the ATGM of the T64B. And now let's have a look what you can actually do with those two shell types. So the last datasheet that I want to present you, I promise, for today, is a part of the datasheet that I released in a video 2 days ago, and we will just focus here on the performance of the Leopard's stock Heat FS and also tier 1 upgrade AP-FSDS rounds against certain parts of the main opposition on the battlefield, namely the M1 Abrams, the Challenger and the T64B. The simple main message and lesson that you should take from it is that you should alternate your shell types depending at which target you shoot. And again, we can see that the Leopard Heat FS round is not very good against the composite parts of the M1 Abrams and the Challenger, regardless if you shoot at the hull, or the turret, regardless of the side, but it's so devastating against the T-64B, also the turret and the hull. Especially the turret is a bit confusing, since there was a lot of fuss about how good those ceramic balls are reducing the effectiveness of a HeatFS shell, but it seems that the nearer plating on the Western tanks, M1 Abrams and Challenger, simply deals better with HeatFS rounds. But when it comes to the AP-FSDS round, we can see that we shoot 10 out of 10 times through the M1 Abrams at a shooting distance of 300 meters, not angled, and we have a 4 out of 10 chance to penetrate the turret on the left and also on the right side for the M1 Abrams, and we have 6 out of 10 penetrations, 6 penetrations out of 10 rounds on the Challenger's left turret side, 10 out of 10 for the composite part on the hull, and also then no penetration on the right side of the turret, and also nearly no penetration on T-64B with the AP-FSDS round. And that is not including the weak spots. So this means even if you have still your stock shell, you can deal with an M1 Abrams and a Challenger from the front. The M1 Abrams, well, there is a part on the hull where you ricochet the heat shell into the turret ring area, and also the area around the gun breech is vulnerable to the HeatFS shell, and then you can flank the tank or retreat or switch to the AP-FSDS round to go then deeper through the turret ring into the crew compartment. The M1 Abrams is really not that nice to take out. The Challenger, on the other hand, just is riddled with weak spots. Not just can you penetrate the turret on the left side and the hull, the composite part of it, but there's also a big portion that is called the lower glacis that has an 11 out of 10 chance to be penetrated. Here a big shout out to Exe, you wanted it, here you have it. But jokes aside, really, the lower glacis is a big target, and also the driver's hatch. Also, the area around the gun mantle is just vulnerable to HeatFS. Same goes for the T-64B, where you can penetrate, well, with the AP-FSDS round on the driver's hatch and also the turret area, or the gun mantle area. So it is important where to not shoot an enemy tank. So against Western tanks, namely M1 Abrams and Challenger, don't use the HeatFS, except if you shoot at weak spots, or you just use it against the T-64B. The AP-FSDS round has a better chance dealing with the Western tanks. But for all intents and purposes, the tank has a rightfully reduced battle rating to 9.0 compared to the new top tier tanks, which you mostly face, namely the M1 Abrams. And here we are finally for the final match that you will see. This is now a match on Karelia that I want to comment on, and where I want to explain certain tactics and things that I did to you. So Karelia is not the very best high tier tank map in my opinion. The high tier tanks, they love the open ground where they can use their mobility and maneuverability and their great guns and great shells at medium to long ranges, but Karelia is really a short range brawling map. It should be used exclusively for tanks up to battle rating, I don't know, 4.0, 4.3, but that is just my opinion. So I looked at the team list. We have a very small enemy team, and they have some American tanks, and it's very likely that we will face some M1 Abrams. Funnily enough, Germany has no 9.3 tanks at this point in time, and still we have to fight them on and on. While I don't mind a T-64B, to constantly fight Abrams and have no battle rating counter for it, it's just a little bit annoying. And so this is usually where I intercept 1 or 2 enemy tanks and then move on. So at this point in time, I'm really confused that nobody is there, and I reverse up the hill and somebody shoots wildly into a rock because he doesn't like him apparently. And another shot. And this is a Jumbo Sherman? Really? Yeah, and I killed 3 of the crew except the radio operator and the gunner, and so I want to follow it up with an AP-FSDS round, and I kill now another crew member, killing the tank with it. So that is curious. Why is no enemy main battle tank coming around here. I need to further investigate, and I need to just go up the hill. And yeah, the Leopard 2K excels as a mountain goat. And then reverse back here because A got captured. And while to farm 1 or 2 or 3 kills early on is always nice, there you can see how difficult it is to make the tank go around, by the way. This is the sluggishness and how the tank struggles with the gears, and despite the high horsepower to ton ratio, it's not really that nice. So this tank just got killed by an MBT-70, and I want to observe. It's no good use to not know where the enemy is and then to just simply rush in. So to kind of do an ambush is always nice. And now we are silent. We are listening. And I hear an engine going around. This is why I didn't move up until the point that I hear the jet engine to move around. And surely enough, there is an MBT-70, and well, he misses me, so I have around about 10 seconds. And I shoot, and I hit the gunner, so that gives me another reload at least. And I move around to reduce the damage of the 20mm to my cannon barrel. And I kill him. But now he has revealed my location, so this is now difficult, as the rest of the enemy team knows that there is something, and when they pay attention in the kill messages, they know that I am a Leopard 2K. Gladly, I'm not that famous that people want to rush now my location. It has happened in one match. It was pretty amusing. But, you know, that aside, let's go into A. And oh boy, there is an M1 Abrams, and I killed him. And I hit not just his loader, but much more important, the cannon breech. And I wanted to actually hit the hull, but I ricochet off the deck of the tank, and yeah, the shell gets absorbed by the composite armor. And again, the shell went high, and I hit the turret. And I could just reverse, hit one of the tracks, but now I have the engine, and there is nothing he can do. He tries to smoke up, but this is pointless, and I should have aimed a little bit better. But you cannot really ammo rack an M1 Abrams, because even though there are 3 shells in the hull, they still get vented up through the back of the turret. Now, while I'm not a real expert on this topic, this seems a little bit odd that shells, which are amongst the crew, get vented out through the back of the turret. That is just nonsense in my books. And now there is not much left of my team, and if I now give my location away by driving into the capture zone, I could not kill the tanks that I expect to be there. So as you can see, I'm reloading some shells into my ready ammo rack, although I have not used too many of them. And I used a little bit the Heat FS round and a little bit the AP FSDS round. And let's see how it goes. Okay, an Abrams just shot wildly, and again I hit the cannon breech. And again I have to rush him. Again I need to take him down. An M1 Abrams is a very dangerous tank. Just a casual drive-by kill on another Sherman. I have no idea why those tanks are there. Again, I just work here. And yeah, I wanted to shot trap through the turret, but I just damaged the gunner here. And he drives aggressively into me. That means he could not repair the gun breach. So this was my chance. And now, again, I got 2 kills. I got shot from the back. So I want to drive into cover and wait out the situation. Now you can see this was this thinking moment where the engine just didn't move the tank forward. Where I just came to a real complete halt. And now I get shot from the back. It is a track, and damn it, I didn't really take out the gun breach on this MBT-70, and he smokes up. But I have to take care of him. The turret ring that I damaged is quickly repaired. And now I have a problem. My gun breech got destroyed. And I hammer the 150mm gun barrel with my 20mm cannon and take it out of action. And he blows his gun up. Now I want to call in an artillery strike to increase my chances, but this MBT-70 rushes me and he hits my fuel tank, which absorbs the damage. And now, same procedure as before, I take out his gun barrel. At least I try to get some good hits in, but it was not to be. Now my gun barrel is damaged as well, so now I have to at least prevent the next hit, extinguish the fire. I'm down to 2 crew members. There is no chance in hell that I can survive it. I tried to take out the gun barrel of the other MBT-70, but before I could zero in the shots, he takes me out with an AP FSDS round, which is a shame. And this time the spaced armor did not absorb the shrapnels and the AP FSDS round, which was kind of a shame. And that was also the end of the match, and this was the result that I posted on Twitter. Just 15,000 silver lions and 1,800 research points for 5 kills with a premium account. That is hard. So that is the tank review on the Leopard 2K, which is a very mobile tank with a hard-hitting gun, at least when you fight against Russians. The stock grind is good, and the lack of armor gets compensated by the mobility and maneuverability, especially on large maps. And I think it's a good introduction to the high-tier tanks. I hope that in the future some other German tanks with armor come into the German tech tree to back it up, and to actually have an equivalent to the Challenger 1 and or also the T-64B, but namely the M1 Abrams in terms of armor. So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.